The Nintendo Entertainment System, the games console that started to change the world of video games and bring them to where they are now. While its most popular games were made, perhaps unsurprisingly, by Nintendo, other developers made games for it too, including arcade games developers, for example. One of these known companies was Konami, and in 1986, they launched an NES game that became a popular series and even inspired an animated series outside of gaming. This is Castlevania. Simply put, Castlevania is a side-scrolling platformer game with several different horror themes. You play as Simon Belmont from the Belmont clan of vampire hunters, on his journey through different haunted castles to eventually reach Dracula himself. Of course, Dracula is not the only monster that Simon is going to encounter. So, let's take Simon and his trusty whip into these castles and see what exactly this game has in store for us. It has to be said right away that the graphics of this game are very impressive for 1986. And for me, this game comes to mind, along with later games in the series, for the contender of the best-looking games on the NES. The details included in areas you pass through really help to set the scene, and that's consistent throughout the whole game, although there is one spot which makes it difficult to see where to go. And to add to the theming of the whole game, the soundtrack is a very strong mix of catchy and spooky, and a different tune plays in each area, which was not something that many games were doing yet. The game is split up into 6 main areas with 3 stages in each. It uses a game over system, and if you lose all of your lives, it sets you back to the first stage of the area, which seems fair enough. It's definitely nicer than restarting the whole game. For the first 2 areas, the difficulty isn't too high, and it's a good time to learn about the different game features. One quirk is the candles that appear on the wall that you can break with your whip to get various items. They're in every stage throughout the game, even when it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like when Simon is down in a cave. Simon's whip isn't too powerful, so one of the items that can drop from a candle is an upgraded whip with more attack power. However, if the player dies, they'll have to start with the original whip again. The candles can also drop hearts, which confusingly have nothing to do with health. Instead, they increase your ammo for the other weapons that the candles drop, such as throwing axes, holy water, or even a stopwatch that temporarily stops time for every enemy. These additional weapons are generally much more powerful than Simon's whip, although they're more awkward than they need to be for a couple reasons. One of these is a minor complaint, but it's still something to consider. The lack of buttons on the NES controller made it so that these additional weapons had to be activated by pressing B while already holding the up button. The select button doesn't have any uses in this game, so it seems strange to me that special weapons would require a combination of button presses, especially since it makes it easier to accidentally use the wrong weapon. But the bigger problem made this game more difficult than it needed to be. So let's talk a bit about the difficulty now. Best looking graphics and a fantastic soundtrack just aren't enough when the main character controls aren't very tight. I'd even call him clunky. Konami made Simon move very slowly, which in some situations might make it easier to dodge enemies, but when the enemies start moving much faster than you can, you start to feel the game is unfair. And okay, perhaps I've been a bit more conditioned to modern games that generally aren't this hard, so the retro gamers out there might now be yelling at me that I have no skill. They'd be right, of course, and I totally get their side that you can just learn different timings to deal with enemies at different speeds. But there's not a lot of skill involved when the enemies start being fast and unpredictable. As I mentioned earlier, the first 2 areas of the game aren't all that difficult. You might still need to rely on additional weapons to take out the bosses of the giant bat and Medusa, but it's not devastating if you don't have any. It's the 3rd area where things start getting out of hand with the unpredictable. We start seeing Igors, yes, not just one Igor, there are many of them, hopping around like mad monkeys. There are also skeletons that throw their bones at random angles, for example. Randomness like this can certainly be a good challenge in games, I won't deny that, but this level of randomness is not good if the character can barely move out of the way quickly enough. It's very hard to tell if it even is possible to get out of the way all the time. Now, on top of that, I haven't yet mentioned Simon's health bar. Simon has 16 HP, which seems like a decent amount, and it's certainly more than enough to start with. In the first 2 areas, every enemy that hurts Simon only takes away 2 HP. Then, in the 3rd area, getting hurt will take away 3 HP, which is getting a bit more evil. But then, from the 4th area to the end of the game, thank goodness it doesn't keep going up, The enemies will steal 4 HP, meaning that Simon is dead after 4 simple mistakes. You've only got 3 lives to get through 3 stages in an area, and since these mistakes can be so simple and easy to make, it really doesn't feel like enough. It's hard to avoid getting hit 12 times over 3 stages. Very, very hard. Mostly, this is due to the later boss fights. Bosses can be some of the most unpredictable challenges in the game. Ideally, you'd be able to use an additional weapon to take care of them more quickly, but the question is, which one should you use? Unfortunately, you can't use just any weapon to take them out, and the game isn't going to tell you which one is best. On top of this, if you found any particular weapon from a candle and had to restart the stage because you took a death, well, too bad, because now the drops from the candles have all changed. The candle items are at least consistent every time you play a stage after you take your first death, but you don't have many deaths to work with before you're forced to restart the area from a game over. Honestly, the candle items moving is a cool feature, but it's the bosses that make it a problem. Apparently boomerangs are great for taking out the pair of mummies, who knew? There are plenty of stage designs that I do like, but the overall design was not there yet. Some of them just feel really given up on, like Stage 11, which is a long stretch of birds flying by and aiming to drop Igors on Simon's head. Or the hallway of flying heads that can enter the screen at any place, moving at different speeds in Stage 15, right before the equally random boss death. I have to say though, I do like the final area a lot. Stage 16, the first in the area, has Simon crossing a bridge to eventually enter the clock tower, but there are giant bats swooping down on him. As it turns out, these are exactly the same bats as the boss Simon defeated in the first area, so it's good symbolism of how far he and the player has come. Fortunately, this time you don't have to stop and defeat them all to move on, so you can just get by them and enter the clock tower. The inside of the clock tower is mostly well designed too, and even with some random enemies, it actually feels like the challenges are well balanced and appropriate for the end of the game. The game's final stage is Stage 18, which starts with a long, suspenseful climb up one last staircase, and the music changes to help add to the climactic feeling. And other than that, there's just the Dracula fight in the stage. It was a good decision to limit the stage to just the boss fight, so the player won't have to go through anything else before the boss fight if they have to restart from a death. And, to fix a problem I had from earlier, you can always obtain holy water to fight Dracula with. There's just one other problem I had though. Even though you can always get a better weapon, the difficulty of the boss fight just isn't fun. There's a second phase in which Dracula transforms into another monster, and without it, the end of the game would probably feel a bit anticlimactic, but I'm not too sure about it. Dracula's difficult enough on his own, and it doesn't exactly help the game to fight the monster unofficially nicknamed Cookie Monster that he turns into. I know difficult boss fights are actually quite popular in modern games now, but my issue here is that it's not actually fun in this case due to a lot of repetitive elements, but also randomness. It's even made me give up on beating this game before. But again, I hear the retro gamers calling me out on my skill issue. So, the quest is over. Let's go! I beat Castlevania! And it's not exactly a triumphant ending, but you know you accomplished something big. The ending theme still has some sinister tones to it, perhaps teasing a sequel. It's a nice touch, even if the English translation of the text is not particularly accurate. It most definitely wasn't easy, and you've listened to me complain about the difficulty for long enough. Although, I still have a lot of respect for what this game is, despite all the unfair-seeming things I've criticized. Perhaps the game would have benefited from having more stages to help make the difficulty curve more gradual. All in all, this game is rather short. Therefore, my final score for Castlevania will be 6.5 out of 10. If you haven't played this game and you like these kinds of challenging retro games, I would absolutely recommend it. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. There are plenty of great experiences you can have with this game, but if you're not ready for this game's true colors, you probably won't enjoy it. I myself have mixed feelings since I'm not good at playing games by any means, but there are a lot of elements I still enjoyed, and I appreciate what this game brought to the table in the series it was able to become. This first Castlevania was re-released on Virtual Console, and it was also finally re-released as part of the Castlevania Anniversary Collection in 2019, if you're looking for an easier way to play it now. Tell me, did you agree with the points I've made? what rating would you give Castlevania for the NES, released in 1986? As ever, thank you for watching, and please continue to be your own unique self.
C is for cookie.